This is Roger at Roger Wood at Large. Andrea Lamoreaux is president of NHLakes.org.
So, New Hampshire Lakes, we are a statewide nonprofit organization. Our mission was up until a few years ago to keep New Hampshire's lakes clean and healthy. But we recently changed our mission, tweaked it to restoring and preserving the health of New Hampshire's lakes because we can't pretend anymore that our lakes are okay.
Mm.
They are they're under stress. There are variety of issues that are threatening their health.
From
So,
what you've said, sorry, I did
yeah,
interrupt, that milfoil is a big problem. Has
yeah,
been, right?
yeah. So, the spread of aquatic invasive species into our lakes has been a longstanding issue in New Hampshire. Of course, we do have one of our premier on-the-ground programs. We run a statewide courtesy boat inspection program called the Lake Host Program, and that's how we're working with boaters across the state to help them take simple actions to prevent the spread of invasive species, milfoil being the number one offender here in New Hampshire.
Spread by spread by boats?
Yeah, so great question. So the primary way that invasive species are spreading into and between our water bodies is by boats that have come from some other water body contaminated with an invasive species, often from out of state. And they come to our waters and they haven't thoroughly cleaned off their boat. They haven't drained all the water out. And so most of the time, a boater doesn't even know that they might be carrying an invasive species. So milfoil, for example, a little fragment, a little piece of milfoil on a boat, if it sort of sneaks into a lake, can drop off and start growing in that new lake. So, yeah, so we work with boaters to clean, drain, and dry off their boats. And we've been doing that since 1990, no, 2002. So I think we just concluded our 23rd summer doing that program.
Sounds like a big effort with so many boats on the lakes.
Yeah, yeah. We station our lake hosts at about 100 of the most highly used boat ramps in the state. There are about, all told, about six or 700 boat ramps, but we're at about 100 of the most highly used boat ramps, meeting and greeting boaters and saying hi and then letting them know about invasive species and then hopefully, asking them if we can take a look at their boat. And usually they say sure and they go around with us too. And we show them all the different nooks and crannies where an invasive species can hang out. And most recently, the past couple of years, we've also been talking to boaters about draining out all the drops of water that might get caught in their boat because we're starting to worry about the spread of invasive animals as well. You may have heard of something called spiny water flea. It's a invasive animal that was found in Lake Winnipesaukee and Lake Winnisquam last fall. And that spreads in drops of water and also on sort of contaminated or fouled fishing gear. So we're talking to boaters about preventing the spread of plants and animals.
What is that creature you just mentioned?
Yeah, the spiny water flea. Um, It is a small little animal. You can see it with the naked eye. And what it does is well, first and foremost, it's really annoying to fishermen because when you reel up your line, it gets all clumpy and sort of fouls your fishing gear. Um, but yeah, down there in the water, what it can do is really alter the natural food web in a lake. And it's not very good food for fish. It's kind of hard and spiny and sharp. And some fish that do manage to eat it, it can actually kind of hurt the fish and from the inside. So what it can
Mhm.
do is really um, alter sort of the natural food web. There's also some research being done about spiny water flea, and its disturbance to the food web could actually lead to more optimum conditions for cyanobacteria to grow in a
That's a
lake.
big issue, isn't it?
Yes.
Cyanobacteria.
Yeah, so we're just trying, scientists are trying to understand if there is a connection between spiny water flea and increasing cyanobacteria growth, particularly in Lake Winnipesaukee, which you may have heard bloomed with cyanobacteria in large areas of the lake on two basically occasions this summer. And that really kind of caught everyone by surprise. What's going on here? So there might be a connection with the increasing spiny water flea there and its impact on the food web and
Well,
what can grow.
well, talk to me about the cyanobacteria and what it does.
Yeah, so cyanobacteria, I'm a biologist. It's a really fascinating creature. It's really old. Part of it was responsible for helping to make sure we have, produce oxygen here on our planet. So it's present in all our lakes in small amounts, but it's sort of like when the perfect storm comes together, it will bloom. So kind of reproduce rapidly and bloom out of control. And those conditions are warmer water, more food, so more nutrient pollution. And when they bloom, then you can see them. And they have all different colors and they can look, different in the water. But some forms of cyanobacteria, not all forms, some forms of cyanobacteria can be toxic. And when I say toxic, it can have short-term or long-term effects depending on, how you're exposed to it. But so yeah, when a lake looks like it might be having a cyanobacteria bloom, then the state gets involved and the local communities get involved, and depending on how dense it is or how widespread it is, there may be warnings that are issued saying, hey, look before you go into this lake. If it looks like something it doesn't look normal, report it. And you know, yeah, there's a lot going on there, but
Yeah.
yeah, trying to make people understand what it looks like and sort of do their own sort of risk assessment to say, okay, the water looks a little interesting today, so yeah.
So stay out.
So when in doubt, stay out and then report it. But just to again, not all forms are toxic, and
Mm.
if there's a cyanobacteria bloom in one area of the lake, other areas of the lake may be totally fine at that time. But certainly, we're worried about, um, depending on the type of cyanobacteria and the toxicity, it can cause people who um, touch it. It can cause skin rashes. It can, if you accidentally ingest it, it can cause gastrointestinal, upset stomachs, nausea, vomiting. And then there's some research being done on, if someone lives near a lake for a number of years and it repeatedly blooms with cyanobacteria, are there some long-term impacts? Um, and I know that there's some research going on at Dartmouth about that and the potential link to ALS and world there's that. So yeah, there's a lot to learn, but certainly, it's best if the water doesn't look quite right, to stay out and report it.
Is it mostly in the big lake? Are we talking about Lake Winnipesaukee or some of the smaller lakes?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So this summer, Lake Winnipesaukee sort of surprised us by blooming with cyanobacteria kind of throughout the lake, even in sort of the open deep water. So that was unusual and alarming. There have been cyanobacteria blooms on Winnipesaukee over the years in isolated areas. But yeah, Winnipesaukee is one of a number of lakes that experienced cyanobacteria blooms this summer. I believe this summer there were about 66 um, warnings issued by the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services about cyanobacteria in our lakes. So there are definitely, what we're finding is sort of no lake is immune to cyanobacteria. There are certainly Small lakes that we would expect it where it's not blooming, but then other small lakes where we would expect it and it is blooming. And then we've got
Hmm.
Winnipesaukee, Lake Wentworth, which is another one of our bigger, more considered healthy lakes. It had some cyanobacteria blooms this summer. So I think there's still a lot that we need to learn about cyanobacteria and why it blooms.
Hmm.
We always say here in lake management, every lake is different. So the water quality and the ecology of every lake is slightly different. So we have to look at each of these lakes sort of one by one and say, okay, well, why is this lake blooming? And okay, now what might be causing this lake to bloom? It's pretty complicated, actually.
Yeah, sounds it.
Yeah.
Is most of the blooming near the shore?
Great question. So generally, um, cyanobacteria are throughout the lake. And the other interesting thing about cyanobacteria is they can regulate how deep they are in the water based on sunlight. They need sunlight so they can come up to the surface, they can go down below. But
Hmm.
then what really does happen is then cyanobacteria can get blown around by wind and waves. So you often, if there's a bloom, you often will see it in, a cove or a wind blown area where it all sort of congregates together. One of the more unusual things with Winnipesaukee, though, this summer is cyanobacteria was seen out in the open area, out in the broads.
Wow.
And that was
I wouldn't
surprising.
expect that. I wouldn't expect that.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
yeah.
so
A
big
little,
and
yeah,
watery.
a little bit of a head scratcher, like, okay, well, what's going on here? But certainly then, we did see it accumulating along shorelines and in cove areas. So they're kind of, they don't have roots, right? They're not rooted to the ground. So they do kind of blow around with the wind and the waves.
How did they all start?
How did cyanobacteria start?
Hmm.
Oh, I mean, again, it's one of the oldest organisms on the planet. So, evolving over time. But I would say here in New Hampshire, when I mentioned a few minutes ago, sort of the perfect storm comes together. So when our waters are getting warmer with our changing climate. One of the other things about Winnipesaukee in particular this past winter is that it really didn't have any ice cover or ice that lasted very long. So Winnipesaukee was probably a little bit warmer than normal. But so when the water is warmer, and then we've been having some pretty crazy weather, right? We're getting wetter here in New Hampshire, but in fewer storms. So we're getting bigger rainstorms, and those rainstorms um, you know, wash water off the landscape. That water picks up pollutants, picks up phosphorus is really the thing that helps to feed cyanobacteria. And phosphorus comes from fertilizer and eroding soil and failing septic systems. So it seems like we're having, warmer weather and more runoff water bringing in more nutrients. So basically more food for these cyanobacteria to grow. So that's, the primary thought among scientists about why we're seeing more and more cyanobacteria blooms. And then each lake may have some specific factors that are also adding to that. Again, we don't know the interaction between the spiny water flea in Winnipesaukee and cyanobacteria, but there may be a link there.
They seem to be, they seem to be blooming. I mean, they seem to be increasing in the lakes, in other words.
Yeah, I do. I would say that yes, over the past 5 years or so, we have seen an increase in cyanobacteria blooms and an increase in the length, the duration that blooms are hanging around. I would also say that people are more aware about cyanobacteria and what it looks like. So we may have more people reporting them. So there's maybe, an interaction there, but I think in scientists, I believe at the Department of Environmental Services would agree that we are seeing an increase in blooms, especially over the past 5 years. And we say here at New Hampshire Lakes, each lake has a tipping point of when they're pretty good health. They can really kind of take a lot of sort of disturbance, but all of a sudden, they reach that tipping point and you see this rapid change in health. And so we think every lake has a tipping point. We don't know where that tipping point is, but we're trying through our programs, trying to help communities sort of bring their lake back away from that tipping point, make their lake more resilient to some of the things that are out of our control. Our changing climate, is somewhat out of our control here. So again, pulling our lakes back from that tipping point. And we do that through a couple different programs that we offer.
I was talking, this is slightly off subject, but not much.
Sure.
Talking
Sure.
to an activist with the Great Bay
Great Bay, yeah.
issue and all their cleanup problems there. And the fact that it's also fertilizer and septic system runoffs
Mhm.
that affect Great Bay.
Sure.
It's interesting that both, I mean, it's both both the lakes and the Great Bay are having problems,
Yeah, and it's we see this happening throughout the country and throughout the world, really. And I think, in Great Bay, it's very similar. The nutrient pollution, nitrogen is also a nutrient that starts impacting the salt water. So yeah, we are seeing, worldwide this increasing incidence of cyanobacteria, and in other places it's called, harmful algal blooms. So we are definitely seeing that rise worldwide. And again, it's probably partially that people are more aware of what it looks like, but again, there's definitely a trend worldwide.
Andrea, like red tide, which
Mm,
is a real problem around the coast, it
yes.
disappears. It dissipates eventually, right? Same
Yeah.
with the cyanobacteria. I mean, it just
Yeah.
dissipates eventually.
Yes, that's a great question. So cyanobacteria, once it starts blooming, it's going to, run its course. We've seen cyanobacteria blooms persist for a day or two in our lakes, up to, a couple months. But eventually it is going to, die off and start to degrade and become decomposed. But right now, we don't have any tools to, really stop a bloom once it starts. We have to let it run its course.
Mm.
And so, once cyanobacteria has been blooming in a lake, it's very important to, keep an eye out for it. And yeah, it will, break up in over time, but just depends.
Sure. Tell me about how your organization, well, is organized, so to speak.
Yeah, so great question. New Hampshire Lakes, again, we're a statewide nonprofit organization. We're supported by individuals, members, and local community groups, so local lake associations. And I've referenced, we offer a couple programs basically to give communities and individuals, a way to help protect and restore the lakes that they love. So I talked one about the Lake Coast program. That's our courtesy boat inspection program in which we help boaters prevent the spread of invasive species. Our other program, really kind of on the ground conservation program, is called our Lake Smart Lake Friendly Living program. So through that program, we work with lake associations and property owners throughout the state, helping property owners take a look at their property, whether they're right next to the lake or up the hill from the lake, take a look at their property and figure out how they can adopt lake-friendly living practices on their property and in their home to reduce or the polluted runoff water that is coming off of their property and potentially feeding those blooms. So,
I'll jump back to that question
yeah.
that the lake, the lake sides are being more occupied by us humans, so to speak, with sometimes pretty ambitious houses, not just
Yeah.
Winnipesaukee, right?
Right, right. Yeah, our increasing population, so we're having more land just in general being converted into hard surfaces where the water can run off rather than getting soaked up. And then we do, see this trend of, you know, existing homes on our lakes being maybe upgraded or being torn down and replaced with bigger homes. And that I would say, anytime we put down a hard surface or we remove the natural vegetation, we are going to have more runoff water. So then more soil with phosphorus, potentially, more fertilizer being washed into our lakes. But we do believe that there is a way to develop around our lakes and to develop in a lake-friendly way. And it's just being mindful of, where the runoff water, minimizing runoff water and directing runoff water, into vegetated areas and into the ground, rather than having it run off the landscape and right into the lake.
Andrea Lamoreaux is president of NH Lakes. She joined in February 2007, bringing a comprehensive understanding of how to effectively work with volunteers, the ecology, and health of the state's lakes and protecting and improving lake health. I'm Roger Wood for Roger Wood at Large.